Hey guys, tonight's story starts with a map no one reads, a treaty no one honors, and a sultan with a headache the size of 3 empires. You're not a soldier or a statesman, you're just standing there, holding a document no one will listen to, while the world politely sets itself on fire around you. There's coffee on the table, smoke in the sky, and someone's arguing about borders again, with a sword. You're about to watch one of history's most powerful empires quietly trip over its own shoelaces. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. The ceiling is dripping again, not with purpose or drama, just an apathetic plip, plip, plip that lands squarely in the saucer meant for guests you haven't had in 6 months. You stare at it for a long moment, wondering if it's rainwater or the building itself trying to weep quietly. The mold in the corner looks judgmental today. Then again, it always does. You sit up, slowly, peeling yourself from a stack of paper that might have been reports once or possibly lunch menus. The ink has smudged across your cheek, which you won't notice until someone else does. You blink at the desk across from you. It's yours, allegedly. There's a nameplate that says, Administrative Liaison, Strategic something. The rest has been scratched out, possibly by you, possibly by time. A pigeon is staring through the cracked window. You nod politely. It doesn't nod back. The note is pinned to your door with a bent spoon. This is not unusual. Most official correspondence arrives via spoon or undercooked pastry these days. You pull it loose and squint at the smudged handwriting. Emergency council meeting. Attendance required, immediately. It is not immediately. It is very much after immediately, possibly late enough to qualify as historically irresponsible. You search for your shoes, which are not where you left them. You check under the cot. 1 slipper. You check behind the filing cabinet, which holds no files but several suspicious socks. No shoe. You look up and briefly entertain the possibility that your shoes have simply resigned. You find one behind the chamber pot and the other inside the desk drawer, nestled beside a broken pen, half a boiled egg, and something that may once have been a medal. You put them on. The left squeaks, the right limps, much like you. The hallway smells like ink and old decisions. A janitor hums a funeral march while pushing a broom that leaves more dust than it collects. You nod. He salutes you with a mop. You are almost certain he outranks you. You take the stairs 2 at a time until you remember your knees are not 18. You take the rest at a more philosophical pace. A portrait of a general frowns at you as you pass. You frown back. He blinks. You decide not to think about it. At the door of the council chamber, you pause. You smooth your jacket, which wrinkles in protest. You straighten your hat. It is not your hat. You do not own a hat. You are now wearing someone else's political affiliation. There is no time to remove it. Inside, the air is thick with tobacco, old paper, and the kind of tension that usually precedes either revolution or tea. Men in heavy coats and heavier mustaches sit around a table that looks like it's holding a grudge. Maps are spread out, all of them lying in their own special way. One depicts borders that haven't existed since your K-so. Grandfather had opinions. Another is upside down, possibly on purpose. The room quiets as you enter. Too quiet. You take your seat, which wobbles slightly to the left. You nod as though late arrival is a respected tactic in diplomatic theater. Someone coughs. No one says your name. You are not entirely sure anyone remembers it. A man with medals stitched directly onto his skin begins to speak. Something about the Balkans, or perhaps breakfast. You aren't listening. You're watching a drop of tea slide slowly down the side of a porcelain cup. It hesitates at the rim, then falls with a tiny splash onto a document you suspect is important. Across the table, someone is sketching a horse in the margins of a treaty. The horse has wings. The wings have flags. No one comments. Someone passes you a paper. It's in French. You do not speak French. You nod like you understand. It appears to be either a trade agreement or a list of cheeses. Either way, someone next to you whispers, "Catastrophic," and you respond with a grave, informed, "Indeed." Outside, a bell rings. No one flinches. Either it means another rebellion, or the bakery has finished the morning rolls. Both are treated with similar reverence. You glance around the table. These are the men shaping the future, or, at least, nudging it down a flight of stairs. A general wipes jam from his mustache. A minister fans himself with a budget report. You realize, quite suddenly, that no one here knows what they're doing. You feel relieved and horrified in equal measure. You lean back in your chair, which groans beneath you like it, too, has lost hope. The empire is wobbling. Your pen doesn't work. You are wearing the wrong hat. And somehow, everyone's still waiting for someone else to fix it. You briefly consider running. You do not. Instead, you reach for the teapot, pour yourself a cup, and sip. It is cold. Of course it is. The parlor smells like roasted chestnuts, betrayal, and someone's too ambitious. Cologne. Curtains hang like they've just been insulted. Thick velvet things that trap heat and secrets equally well. A chandelier overhead trembles with each footstep. Either from age or fear, it's unclear. The furniture is the kind that looks expensive, but feels like sitting on historical tension. You hesitate at the threshold, wondering if your presence will make things better, worse, or just add one more person to the blame pile when everything inevitably catches fire. The men inside wear uniforms that suggest importance, but fit like they were borrowed last minute from a theatrical production about defeat. Shoulders too tight, buttons straining, hats clutched in hands like talismans against accountability. One has medals that look like they were glued on during a bumpy carriage ride. Another picks at a blister on his thumb with the kind of concentration normally reserved for war maps. None of them look up as you enter, but every eye notices. You're not important, but you are new. A man at the center coughs. Loud, wet, possibly staged, possibly dying. No one moves to help. Everyone pretends it's not contagious. You count 5 men pretending to study the carpet, and 3 others blinking at the ceiling like they've just remembered how it works. The cough echoes once more, a punctuation mark with phlegm. You nod respectfully toward it, unsure of etiquette in these situations. The document is on the table, spread wide like a patient on an operating slab. It is long, handwritten, and too polite to admit it might be a death sentence. The paper glows slightly from the sunlight that filters through stained glass and cigarette smoke. You approach like it might bite. A nearby official gestures vaguely in your direction, possibly as introduction, possibly to shoo you toward the tea. You choose the tea. It's tepid and smells faintly of overboiled diplomacy. The cup is too thin and too small, like it's trying to be delicate in a room full of collapsing empires. You sip anyway. It tastes like compromise. Someone clears his throat. Not the coughing man. A different one. Throat clearing, it seems, is how this council communicates. 3 men nod solemnly. One stifles a yawn and turns it into a grimace. The man nearest to the treaty adjusts his monocle with a twitch that suggests it's not prescription. You pretend to read the document. Not because you understand it, but because not pretending would make you look suspicious. The ink is ornate. The clauses go on forever. There is a section about shipping rights, one about religious tolerance, and another that possibly outlines fishing privileges in a body of water that no longer exists. You nod at the appropriate spots. Occasionally you murmur, or interesting, in the tone of someone who just found out their inheritance is conditional. Across the table, someone says, irreversible. It's not clear what he means. It might be the treaty. It might be the stain forming under his arm. Either way, the word lands like a dropped sword. A man with eyebrows that deserve their own military rank finally speaks. "Gentlemen," he says, and then stops, possibly because he forgot the rest of the sentence, or possibly because the coughing man has started again, and it's hard to compete with that kind of drama. This time it sounds wetter. A few people flinch. One crosses himself discreetly behind a napkin. Someone finally says the word partition. Another says restructuring. And a third offers necessary adjustments, which is met with silence, so profound the chandelier swings slightly out of respect. You look at the treaty again. Somewhere in the fine print, between clauses and commas, the empire is being politely disassembled. There's a paragraph about regional autonomy that uses the word temporary 4 times in 3 lines. You've been in enough meetings to know that means permanent. The tea is gone. You swirl the last dregs in your cup like you might find a future there. The leaves at the bottom say nothing helpful. One looks like a skull. The man at the head of the table sighs. He's not the leader. No one is. That's part of the problem. But he sighs like he's been waiting all morning to do it. A kind of performance exhale. One that says, "Well, we've done all we could," when what he really means is, "Please don't blame me when the borders start leaking." Someone suggests a vote. No one objects. That, in itself, is the objection. The document is passed around. Each man signs with a flourish designed to disguise how his hand is shaking. You are last. Of course you are. The pen is too heavy. The ink smells like rust. The line is already dotted. You hesitate, but only for a moment, because history, as you are quickly learning, is rarely written by the qualified. It's written by the punctual. The Sultan is not where he usually is, which is to say, reclining, vaguely mysterious, and surrounded by so many silk cushions, it's hard to tell where he ends and the upholstery begins. Today he stands, not firmly, not with purpose, more like someone who's just realized the room is slowly spinning and isn't quite sure whether to sit back down or apologize to it. You wait in the doorway, unsure whether you should clear your throat or turn into mist. Someone nods toward you, which is either permission or a trap. You step forward anyway, resisting the urge to bow so deeply your spine forgets how to come back up. The room is hushed, not silent. There's the clink of a spoon in a cup somewhere, and the soft flutter of a bored pigeon against the window, but hushed in the way museums are hushed. Right before a child breaks something priceless, the Sultan turns toward you. His eyes are unreadable. Not in the poetic sense, more in the way that his gaze passes directly through you, as if you're a slightly annoying smudge on an otherwise nice view. His robe is embroidered with peacocks. One of them stares at you too. You try not to take it personally. You clear your throat, softly, diplomatically, like a man about to announce that the last lifeboat has floated away without him. He gestures faintly, not with interest, but with the weary grace of a man who's waved away too many crises and now just wants to finish his tea before it gets cold again. You deliver the message. You use the formal phrasing, the respectful tone, the carefully chosen euphemisms. You say the treaty has been processed. You say unforeseen implications and new realities. You mention the Council's unified interpretation of sovereignty. You are a diplomat now, apparently. The Sultan listens. He does not blink, which makes you feel like maybe you should stop blinking too. You reach the end of your summary, which takes 3 sentences but costs you at least 4 years of lifespan. He exhales, just once. Then he turns and stares at the wall. Not dramatically, not angrily, just pointedly, as if the wall has betrayed him, as if somewhere behind the faded wallpaper and poor plaster job is the answer to where it all went wrong. You follow his gaze. All you see is a crack that looks vaguely like a map of the Balkans. He nods slowly, once, the kind of nod usually given to graveyards or letters written too late. Then he walks to the window and stares out at the gardens. They're not well kept. A cat sleeps in the tulip bed. A gardener is trimming hedges that haven't grown in months. Somewhere, someone drops a tray. No one flinches. You stand there, holding the silence like a tray full of full teacups. The Sultan says nothing more. He raises a hand, faintly, and waves. It's not a farewell, not quite. It's the kind of wave a man gives when he's tired of choosing verbs. It could mean leave. It could mean fix it. It could mean go and make this someone else's problem before it becomes mine again. You bow anyway, not because you're expected to, but because it's something to do with your hands. You back out of the room, as carefully as if it's made of glass. The pigeon flutters once more against the window, then gives up. It has more sense than most. In the corridor, the guards say nothing. They stand like statues, except one is chewing something, possibly rebellion, possibly pistachios. You don't ask. You walk down the hall, shoes echoing against marble that's cracked just slightly more than it was yesterday. You think about the Sultan's face, the distant look in his eyes, the way he stared at the wall like it had made a promise it didn't keep. The empire is still here, but something about the way he waved tells you it's already becoming a memory. The cafe of no return has no sign, no menu, and no clear owner. But somehow it has more chairs than customers and never runs out of spoons. It lives in a crooked corner where the street forgets how to be straight, shaded by an awning that gave up on symmetry years ago. The tables wobble, the cups chip with dignity, and the sugar bowl always contains exactly one cube too few. You are not supposed to be here, not officially. There's likely a meeting you're avoiding, or a document somewhere with your name misspelled and underlined in red. But the cafe calls to you, not loudly, not urgently, just with the weary magnetism of a place where nothing needs to be explained and everything is already too late to fix. Inside, the air is thick with cardamom, old jokes, and the kind of smoke that's probably illegal but too tired to apologize for it. Two men argue over a backgammon board, slamming pieces down with the confidence of generals and the strategy of house cats. One of them accuses the other of cheating. The other accuses him of forgetting how to lose. They do this every day, sometimes twice. At the corner table, the barber is holding court. He's trimmed the hair of every important man in the city, or so he claims. In truth, he trims more gossip than follicles. Today, he is explaining how the empire fell in love with itself and now refuses to file for divorce. His audience nods solemnly, mostly because it's impolite to interrupt a man holding scissors. A child walks between the tables, waving newspapers with dramatic headlines printed in ink that smudges if you look at it too hard. No one buys one. They all nod at him, and he nods back, as if to confirm that yes, the world continues to spiral, and no, you won't read about it properly here. Collapse, someone mutters. The word lands like a cat on a shelf, soft, but dangerous if ignored. The speaker is an old man who drinks tea like it owes him money. He says the empire's about to crumble. He says it like he's said it for the past 20 years, and everyone pretends this time might be different. Does that mean cheaper tobacco? Asks the man next to him, lifting his mustache to sip. There is a pause as the cafe collectively weighs the merits of historical doom against discount smoking. No conclusion is reached. You take a seat without asking. That's how it works here. If the chair's not warm, it's yours. A waiter arrives without being called and places a cup in front of you that you didn't order, but is exactly what you wanted. You do not question this. Someone begins a story that doesn't end. A poet recites a verse to his spoon. A woman sells roasted chestnuts to no one in particular. The sun moves across the floor like it's checking in on each table. Outside, a dog barks at a statue for the third time today. The statue continues not to respond. The empire, if it is collapsing, chooses to do so quietly here. It sighs between sips of tea. It lingers on the tongue of a sweet too sticky to finish. It curls around the edge of a conversation that loses its point halfway through and never bothers to return to it. A man at the window folds a paper crane out of a summons to appear in court. He sets it gently on the table and watches it sit there, doing nothing, just like him. You lean back, cup in hand, surrounded by voices that have run out of things to panic about. There's a comfort in it, not peace, exactly. More like the lull before a storm no one's convinced will arrive. Someone offers you a piece of baklava. It sticks to your fingers and tastes like everything you've ever avoided. And outside, somewhere far too close, the future is sharpening its teeth. The general enters with the gait of a man who has marched too far in the wrong direction and decided it's the map's fault. His boots leave little flakes of dried mud on the marble, like breadcrumbs for no one. His uniform is immaculate in the way only something recently ironed by a terrified aide can be, and his mustache arrives half a second before the rest of him. Under his arm, a roll of parchment, bulging and frayed, as if the wars it survived are still trying to claw their way out. He unrolls the map with theatrical flair, scattering teacups and elbow room. The paper is cracked, yellowed, and smells faintly of horses and misplaced confidence. It depicts a world that no longer exists, borders drawn with the confidence of someone who's never met a cartographer or a realist. Whole countries have been renamed, dismembered, or politely ignored. There is a peninsula labeled "definitely ours," and a river that curves like it's trying to escape the whole conversation. This, the general says, tapping the parchment with a pointer made from something that once poked at enemies, is the strategic situation. You squint at it. The empire's borders are far too generous, stretching into territories that now politely shoot at your couriers. One city is marked with a star, and the word "important" scrawled beside it. You point at a neighboring province currently under someone else's flag and ask, delicately, whether this version it's recent. He waves you off like a mosquito. Maps are suggestions, he says, puffing up with the certainty of someone who's never had to find a latrine in unfamiliar territory. Lines are illusions. Borders are imaginary. You glance at the others. A few nod. One writes something down as if he's just heard the secret to eternal peace. You try again. Soldiers, you say carefully, are not imaginary. The general laughs. It's a wet, clanking sound, like a coin swallowed by a pipe. He looks at you with amusement, like a parent indulging a child who's just questioned gravity. That's why we train them, he says, to move through illusions. He gestures broadly, nearly smacking a junior clerk in the face. Morale, he declares, is more powerful than any border. When you believe a city belongs to you, it often does. He smiles, proud of this logic, as though he's just reinvented both geography and hubris in the same breath. Someone claps, then someone else, not because it makes sense, but because clapping seems easier than disagreeing. The sound bounces around the chamber like a rubber ball no one meant to throw. You consider applauding, but your hands are currently busy, gripping your chair to keep from falling into despair. The general continues, tracing lines with the pointer, creating new paths through hills he's never seen and valleys that now belong to other governments. He proposes a maneuver involving 3 regiments, 1 ferry, and a goat trail last used by smugglers in the previous century. It sounds impressive until you realize he's reading from a plan written during a completely different war. You open your mouth, then close it. There is no room for logic in a room full of nostalgia. At one point, he mentions a town that no longer exists, raised in a conflict the empire no longer admits happened. He describes its citizens, their loyalty, their willingness to rise up when the empire calls. You do not mention that they now rise for another anthem, or that last week, one of them threw a rock at your envoy. Instead, you nod, because that's the currency here. Not truth, not strategy, just nodding at the right volume. The map sags slightly in the middle, like it's tired of being believed in. You notice someone using the far corner to blot ink. Another has spilled tea across the northern frontier. The general doesn't seem to mind. He's too busy redrawing the world with his pointer and a smile that has never encountered consequence. You lean back, watching him draw circles around cities that no longer answer to your flags, sketching campaigns with the enthusiasm of a man who's never had to explain failure to a widow. The room swells with a sense of action, motion, resolve. But the map remains where it is, old, cracked, and wrong, just like everything else. The room smells like dried ink and boiled leather, which makes sense considering most of its contents are either outdated stationery or men who've become furniture in the service of the empire. You sit at a table that tilts slightly to the left, possibly in protest. The sunlight filters in through a window so dusty it diffuses everything into a vague golden haze, like being trapped inside a memory with paperwork. You're here to draft the official response to something. A treaty, maybe. An ultimatum. A minor catastrophe in the form of a very stern letter. The envelope was sealed with wax and slight panic, so it must be important. They said you'd be perfect for this, that you had a way with words. What they mean is that you once rewrote a shipping delay notice in rhymed couplets, and now you're the closest thing the office has to a poet. There are 4 other people in the room. One has already fallen asleep with his eyes open. Another is aggressively sharpening a pencil that no one is using. The third is sketching something in the margins of a military memo that may or may not be a self-portrait with a crown. The fourth, unfortunately, has opinions. We should start with strength, he says, thumping the table, which lets out a startled groan. Firmness, clarity, bold font. What font? Asks the sleepy one, who may have dozed off mid-sentence and just auto-completed it subconsciously. Diplomatic italics, says the man with the crown sketch, without looking up. Assertive slant, elegant, but with menace. Menace is good, someone murmurs, possibly to their tea. You suggest simplicity, something clean, serifed, maybe even honest. The room goes quiet, the way it does when someone brings up mortality at a birthday party. Too honest, someone finally says, as though it's contagious. We're still pretending we have leverage, remember? Someone suggests underlining the word concerned. Someone else crosses it out and replaces it with unperturbed, then scratches that out too and draws a tiny horse. No one addresses this. A junior clerk appears with a tray of tea and 5 mismatched cups, one of which is technically a sugar bowl. You get the sugar bowl. You do not ask questions. You try to begin a draft. You write, "To whom it may concern," but concern feels presumptuous. You change it to the respected representatives of the Allied, and then trail off, unsure if respected is still legally accurate. You underline it, then draw a question mark that becomes a frown. The man with the pencil sharpener leans over your shoulder. "Make sure we include the phrase, 'within reason,'" he says. It's a legal shield, and a prayer. The sleepy one mumbles something about how this all reminds him of the letter he wrote to his ex-wife. No one asks him to elaborate. The chair beneath you squeaks every time you shift, which makes you feel like the world is disapproving of your spine. The others fidget in unison. It's less a meeting now, and more a symphony of indecision performed on squeaky furniture. The debate drifts toward whether the empire should capitalize empire. Someone argues it shows strength. Another says it feels desperate. A third suggests capitalizing everything just to see what happens. You finally manage a sentence. The empire views these developments with measured attention. It feels safe, vague, like you've said something without saying anything. Everyone nods. One even claps. You feel hollow pride. Then a man at the far end of the table, who hasn't spoken until now, who may not even officially work here, says, "What if we just surrendered?" The room freezes, then turns toward him as one. He shrugs. Not all at once, just a little, in the wording. So when they win, we can say we saw it coming. You sip from your sugar bowl. It's bitter. The sun has shifted now, casting long shadows across the parchment. You filled half a page, mostly with qualifiers, conditional verbs, and beautifully hedged nothing. The response is nearly complete. It says everything, without promising a single thing, which is, you suppose, its own kind of art. The parade begins at 1/2 premature. It's not officially sanctioned, of course. Nothing ever is unless it's been discussed in triplicate and forgotten twice. But someone misread a memo, possibly upside down, possibly on purpose, and now a line of cheerful citizens is snaking through the main square with tambourines, optimism, and exactly one goat. The drums come first, naturally. Always the drums. They pound with the kind of enthusiasm that implies someone's been waiting for an excuse to wear epaulets and yell rhythmically at children. Flags are handed out like pastries, and somewhere a man is already halfway through a stirring speech that no one asked for, but everyone listens to out of habit. You arrive just as a small boy waves a very large flag and is immediately tackled by a retired colonel who shouts something about protocol and the sanctity of national symbolism. The boy looks confused. The flag looks wrinkled. The colonel looks victorious. Everyone claps, unsure why. Nearby, a vendor sells lukewarm lemonade and revolutionary slogans on paper fans. A woman in a fez hands out pamphlets that say, "Victory is inevitable," in 3 different fonts, none of them confident. The goat wears a sash that reads "Honorary Commander" and chews it thoughtfully. No one is entirely sure what is being celebrated. Word has traveled quickly and untruthfully, as it tends to do. Someone heard the crisis is over. Someone else heard the empire gained a province back. Someone just wanted an excuse to wear their nicest shoes. Regardless, the air is full of relief, so flimsy it could be folded into a paper boat and floated down the Bosphorus. You try to explain, once, to a particularly animated drummer, that no official peace has been declared, no territories returned, no diplomats wept joyfully in public. He nods gravely, then hands you a balloon. The mayor, or a man wearing enough medals to suggest mayorship, climbs onto a crate and begins thanking people for their service, their loyalty, their patience. He thanks the musicians. He thanks the goat. He thanks the weather. He forgets to mention reality. No one notices. Then a courier arrives. He's dusty, breathless, and clearly not here for the lemonade. He pushes through the crowd like bad news in a cheerful sentence. His satchel swings dangerously close to the goat, who glares but yields nothing. A whisper spreads. Papers are exchanged. Eyebrows rise in synchronized disbelief. The mayor's face changes in stages. Confusion, denial, mild gastric distress. He tries to keep speaking, but now the words taste different in his mouth, like someone swapped the sugar for salt halfway through. Someone starts folding up the flags. Someone else unplugs the amplifier. The drums stop mid-beat, creating a silence so abrupt it stumbles into awkwardness. The colonel gently untackles the boy and dusts him off. The crowd disperses in a practiced way, as if this isn't the first celebration to end before the baklava arrives. People return to their doorways, their errands, their quiet suspicions. The goat remains, chewing decisively, sash still half devoured, but spirit entirely intact. You stand alone with the confetti and confusion, trying to remember if anyone ever declared this a parade, or if it just became one when people decided they needed it. The empire, after all, has always been best at improvisation. A man next to you shrugs. "At least we got outside," he says, as if that counts for something. And maybe it does. Maybe showing up is its own kind of patriotism. Behind you, someone quietly retrieves the drums, careful not to make a sound. The goat sneezes once, then trots away like it owns the square. You watch it disappear down a side street, still defiant. It's hard to say who won today, but it wasn't the parade. In the lesser hallway of the not quite west wing of the palace, just past the cracked portrait of a vizier no one remembers, and directly beneath the leak that drips in time with the national anthem, a protest is unfolding. It is not a large protest. In fact, it is mostly just one boy, standing atop a wooden crate previously used to store disappointing pears. But what the protest lacks in numbers, It makes up for in conviction, and the crate wobbles with a kind of revolutionary optimism. The boy is the janitor's son. He is 10, possibly 11, though his seriousness adds at least 2 extra years and a monocle's worth of gravitas. His shoes are polished to a shine so blinding it may constitute a military advantage. His laces, however, are tragic, frayed, uneven, one replaced with string from a parcel that once held sardines. This, he declares, is unacceptable. He demands new shoelaces, also constitutional reform. His speech is written on 4 sheets of stolen stationery, folded with care and underlined in red ink. He reads it aloud, one hand held aloft like a statue, the other clutching a biscuit he was given to keep him quiet. It did not work. You arrive midway through paragraph 3, which begins, "And furthermore, we the undershined and insufficiently represented declare." He does not stutter. He does not blink. His voice echoes down the hallway, past diplomats who pretend to be deeply engaged in maps, and up toward minor nobility who pretend not to hear anything that isn't their own title. You recognize the phrasing. There are words in there: enfranchisement, fiduciary duty, bureaucratic apathy that no child has any business knowing. You look around and spot the librarian lurking behind a potted plant, whistling like a man who has definitely ghost-written a revolution. A guard stands nearby, holding a tray of tea and a scroll he has no intention of reading. He shifts awkwardly. "Should we stop him?" he whispers. You consider the options. The boy is eloquent, loud, and currently being handed a second biscuit by someone from the Ministry of Furniture. A small crowd has gathered. They clap at the right intervals, which is more than you can say for most parliamentary sessions. "No," you say. "We observe. It's the safest course of action. History has not been kind to those who silence children with good diction." The janitor appears, out of breath and embarrassed, waving a mop like a peace flag. He apologizes profusely. He says the boy has been reading pamphlets again. He tries to usher him off the crate, but the boy holds firm. "I will not be pacified with crumbs," he declares, while eating the second biscuit. Someone offers him a third. The speech ends with a list of demands that includes new shoelaces, access to the palace fountain on weekends, and a re-examination of the military budget in light of recent goat-related events. It is signed in careful cursive from the desk of the future. There is a pause, then someone claps, then everyone does, because no one, absolutely no one, wants to be the official who went on record opposing children, biscuits, or justice. You step forward, gently suggest a committee be formed to look into the matter. The boy narrows his eyes with suspicion far beyond his years, but nods once. He hands over the speech. It is smudged with crumbs and conviction. Later, in a meeting room with a slanted chandelier and 3 broken quills, the speech is filed under public sentiment, unclassified, potentially inconvenient. The librarian receives a stern talking to, followed by a request to help draft tomorrow's official address. The janitor scrubs the floor in silence. His son is already outside, leading a game of revolutionary hopscotch. The palace goes on, a little shinier, slightly more democratic, and entirely unsure what just happened. You are holding it. You are absolutely, definitely holding it. The seal of state, the emblem of imperial authority, the one thing that makes a decree more than just an expensive letter. It is in your hand. You feel its familiar, heavy weight, brass, or maybe bronze, depending on whether anyone remembered to requisition real materials this quarter. Either way, it's solid, warm from your touch, smooth as a lie, and about twice as dangerous. Then you sneeze. It is not a dramatic sneeze. No lightning cracks, no vases topple, no birds scatter in cinematic panic. It is a small, pitiful sneeze, the kind that lives in dusty corners and administrative offices. You wipe your nose. You look at your hand. You are no longer holding the seal. There is a moment brief, silent, eternal, where you stand very still and hope it's just in your other hand. It is not. You pat your pockets. You check the desk. You check the floor. You check your soul. It's gone. Panic arrives, dressed in polite denial. You calmly lift the rug. Nothing. You check under the inkwell. Nothing but a beetle with very strong opinions. You peer into your cup of tea and, for one deranged second, consider drinking it just to make sure. You do not scream. Not outwardly. The clerk next to you notices your expression and leans over. "Everything all right?" he asks, in the tone of a man who absolutely hopes it is not, because he is very bored. "Fine," you say, "just thinking about wax." It's not technically a lie, because now the idea has taken root. Wax, any wax, all wax is, in theory, just melted authority. You eye the candle burning on the nearby shelf, short, stubby, halfway through its life and smelling faintly of vanilla, which someone said was calming. You never believed them, but now you must. You stand slowly, like a man preparing for a very mild crime. You lift the candle, pour a careful blob onto the parchment, and press it with the bottom of your teacup. There is a soft hiss, a small puff of scented deceit. You step back. It looks plausible, not regal, exactly, but passable, like a seal that has seen hard times and emerged less decorative but still bureaucratically binding. No one questions it. Someone even compliments the aroma. The letter is sent. It carries with it the full weight of the empire, minus one actual seal. You sit down, composed, professional, absolutely hollow inside. Later, under the dim light of a corridor lantern, you return to the office and resume the search. You remove the rug entirely. You shake out your robes. You inspect the janitor's broom for signs of complicity. Nothing. It is as if the seal simply decided it had had enough and left to join a simpler nation. There is a stew bubbling in the kitchen. You stare at it long and hard. The cook looks nervous. "Carrot?" he offers. You say nothing. You consider diving in. You do not. Instead, you return to your desk, where the scent of vanilla still lingers, and file a report titled, "On the Evolution of Imperial Stamp Aesthetics." A modern necessity. It is 15 pages long and contains graphs. You hope no one reads past the first paragraph. Weeks will pass. The seal will not return. A replacement will be ordered, eventually, and arrive with the wrong emblem. It will be used anyway. History will record nothing of this. The empire will continue to wobble forward, decisions authorized by the quiet fiction of melted candles. And somewhere, beneath the floorboards or deep within a stew pot, the original seal slumbers, possibly smug, definitely missing. The room is full of paperwork and false confidence. Sunlight slants across the table like a spotlight for tragedy, illuminating stacks of treaties, counter-treaties, and one particularly aggressive sandwich someone abandoned near the foreign policy addendum. You are present in body, if not spirit, hunched behind a sheaf of legalese so dense it might qualify as a new form of matter. Somewhere, someone is trying to argue the correct placement of a comma. Elsewhere, someone is asleep with their eyes open. The clerk at the end of the table is humming. He is also allergic to dust. He sneezes. It is a glorious, full-body, bureaucratically catastrophic sneeze. The kind of sneeze that echoes off walls and leaves documents fluttering like startled birds. And in the chaos while reaching for a handkerchief, balancing a pen, and trying not to knock over the ink pot, his hand jerks forward and signs. It's not just any document. It is the document, the one you have been actively avoiding, the one that arrived with the words "read carefully," written in red, underlined twice, and then inexplicably crossed out and replaced with "never mind, just sign." You watch it happen in slow motion. The pen scratches, the ink pools, the clerk blinks, and just like that, the empire's signature is on the page. Someone claps. You don't know who. You never find out. They probably mean well. The clerk dabs his nose, smiles sheepishly, and slides the document into the outgoing tray, which is really just a wooden box with faded lettering and a wasp living in it. You open your mouth to stop it, to scream, to undo the moment, but you do not, because your eyes have just landed on Clause 14. Clause 14, nestled innocently between a fishing rights amendment and a statement about seasonal goose migration, reads, "The Ottoman Empire, henceforth, shall no longer exercise independent authority in matters of war, diplomacy, taxation, or lunch scheduling, and will instead defer to the collective interests of the signatory coalition." You read it twice, then a third time. Each reading makes it worse. It is, legally and linguistically, the equivalent of taking the empire, folding it into a paper swan, and handing it to a passing foreign power with a polite bow. You go still, completely still. You hope, somehow, to become furniture. A chair, perhaps, a low table, something that has no opinion on sovereignty. A junior official leans in and says, "Good to get that sorted, eh?" And you nod very slowly, as if your neck is no longer your own. Around the room, people are rising, stretching, congratulating one another on another productive morning of mutual destruction. Tea is poured. A biscuit is snapped in half and offered with the words, "Victory tastes like almond." You smile. You are not sure how. The document has already left the room. It is probably halfway down the corridor by now, in the hands of a courier who thinks it's just another bit of paperwork. Maybe it will get lost. Maybe the wasp will sting someone important. Maybe a minor miracle will intervene. You do not chase it. Instead, you lower yourself into your chair, which creaks ominously, and begin filling out Form 77B, notification of unintentional policy shift due to sneezing. It requires 6 signatures, 3 witnesses, and an apology written in verse. There is no space on the form for "we accidentally dissolved an empire." You consider adding a footnote. Outside, the bells chime noon. Inside, the slow undoing of centuries has already been mailed. The room smells faintly of ink, overcooked, eggplant, and the kind of tension that builds when nobody wants to admit they don't understand what's going on. A chandelier swings overhead in a lazy arc, creaking with every diplomatic pause. You are seated near the middle, close enough to hear the important parts, far enough that no one expects you to speak. This is your ideal range. The treaty has returned for final reading. Again, possibly the 6th time, though time is subjective when documents are translated by committee. This one, they say, just needs a few clarifications. No drama, no fireworks. Just a simple reading and nodding, and then off to wherever treaties go to collect dust and consequences. The translator steps forward. He is not the usual one. This man is taller, thinner, and seems to glide rather than walk, like a man who has never once stepped in something unpleasant. His robe is too clean. His spectacles are rounder than necessary. He opens the scroll and clears his throat with theatrical flair. A hush falls. He begins. The translation is going well, smooth, deliberate, even poetic in places. There is a line about river access that somehow sounds romantic. There is a section on trade tariffs that almost rhymes. You relax a little. You allow your fingers to uncurl from the edge of the table. Then he reaches Article 9. Clause 9, he says, adjusting his glasses for effect, states that the province of Mehli will receive partial autonomy, effective upon mutual ratification. That is what he is supposed to say. What he actually says is, Clause 9 states that the province of Mehli will receive total independence, effective immediately. There is a sound in the room, not a gasp, not quite. It is the auditory equivalent of everyone internally blinking at once. A pause, followed by a soft shuffling as people glance at one another to confirm whether they all heard the same thing. They did. You lock eyes with the minister across the table. He looks like a man who has just watched someone propose marriage to the wrong person at a funeral. You open your mouth to object, then close it, because the translator is bowing. With perfect serenity, he closes the scroll, gives a polite nod to no one in particular, and walks out of the room. No one stops him. You think about it for a moment. Then you think about the treaty. You think about Clause 9. You think about Meli, which has long been the empire's least manageable headache, and how its governor once tried to declare war on daylight savings. No one says anything. A junior scribe scribbles something, possibly his will. The silence continues until someone coughs and says, "Well, the ink is already dry." Another man, clearly trying to recover the room's dignity, mutters, "Perhaps it's a symbolic independence." There is an awkward chuckle, then another, and just like that, the treaty is moved forward, passed along. A rubber stamp is brought out. The seal, recently replaced and still faintly vanilla-scented, is pressed into wax. It is done. The translator does not return. You ask around later, casually, as if you're only mildly curious about the man who just unintentionally or very intentionally restructured the empire. No one knows his name. Someone mentions he fed a cat outside the palace earlier that morning. Someone else says he rented a room above the fishmonger and paid 3 months in advance. By evening, the cat has taken up residence in the apartment. It sits on the balcony like royalty, accepting offerings of dried anchovies and refusing to acknowledge anyone without a bow. The province of Meli begins flying its own flag by Thursday. No one can decide if this was a brilliant power play or an allergy-induced diplomatic heist. Either way, the cat doesn't seem concerned, and the translator, wherever he is, probably isn't either. You stand outside the Sultan's chamber for a full minute before knocking, just in case divine intervention feels like arriving late. Inside, everything is quiet, in the way that only thick carpets and heavy decisions can make a room feel. The air is warm, scented faintly of old books and older silences. You clutch the parchment tighter, the one with the news on it, though by now the news feels less like information and more like a confession. The guards nod for you to enter. One of them whispers something that might be, "Good luck," or possibly, "He's already broken 2 teacups today." The Sultan is sitting by the window, not at the desk, not on the throne, just by the window, in a chair that looks like it was dragged there against its will. He does not turn when you enter. He simply watches the garden, where 2 cats are locked in an epic staring contest over a patch of sun. You clear your throat. He doesn't react. You step forward, bow slightly, and read the message, the way you've been trained. Formally, clearly, and with as little emotional inflection as possible, which is difficult considering Clause 9 now has its own parade. You make it to the end. You lower the parchment. He says nothing. You wait. Still nothing. He breathes in slowly, the kind of inhale that feels like it might come with a prayer or a curse, but instead, it just comes with a soft sigh. Then, very quietly, almost to himself, he asks, "Does anyone have any strong tea?" You blink. "Strong," he repeats, "the kind that bites back." There is a long pause, during which you consider offering to go make it yourself, despite not knowing where the kitchen is. But then he adds, "And maybe a good story." You nod, because it's all you can do, and then you realize this is it. This is his surrender, not the kind that gets announced from balconies or written into dusty ledgers. This is the quieter kind, the real kind, the kind that shows up in an empty gaze and a request for tea that tastes like it remembers better years. You glance at the table beside him. There's a plate with a half-eaten fig and a spoon that looks like it was set down with more emotion than should be applied to silverware. A stack of correspondence sits unopened. At the very top, a letter from Meli, with its new flag drawn enthusiastically in the corner. The Sultan shifts slightly, still not facing you. "You know," he says, "I once rode for 3 days to stop a border skirmish, sat in the mud with both generals until they remembered they liked apricots more than war." You wait for more, but it doesn't come. "Sometimes," he says, "you don't lose a kingdom. You just look up one day and realize it's somewhere you used to live." The garden cat fight has devolved into mutual ignoring. A gardener drops a rake and mutters an apology to no one in particular. You finally step back, bow again, and say you'll have the tea brought immediately. As you leave, you hear him whisper something else, softer than the silk on the curtains, almost childlike in its wonder. I thought we had more time. The door closes behind you with a sound like history exhaling, and somewhere, very far away, a kettle starts to boil. The letter arrives in a stained envelope that smells vaguely of goat cheese and optimism. It's handed to you by a courier who looks unusually cheerful for someone navigating what is technically a national crisis. You break the seal, expecting casualty numbers, supply complaints, or one of those poetic metaphors about mud from the junior officers. Instead, the letter begins. We've made it, sort of. Your stomach does something quiet and unpleasant. The letter goes on to explain, in handwriting that gets progressively more enthusiastic, that the 14th Border Battalion tasked with securing the Empire's southeastern frontier has, through a series of completely understandable navigational choices, arrived in a place that is not technically within the Empire at all. It has a name you don't recognize, a flag that looks like it was designed by a drunk cartographer, and apparently a deep cultural fondness for lentils. They were supposed to be fortifying a ridge near Karhan. Instead, they are attending a music festival and have been gifted commemorative spoons. You read the letter twice. You consider the possibility that this is a prank, but the official seal is there, smeared slightly with what appears to be jam. The signature belongs to Commander Altich, a man known less for his navigational prowess and more for his ability to fall asleep standing up. The phrase, "It's nice here," appears 4 times. You summon a cartographer. He arrives with 3 maps, none of which agree with each other or reality. One of them includes a lake that hasn't existed since the last major thunderstorm. After 20 minutes of squinting and rotating parchment, you manage to locate where the battalion should have been. They are 1 full province south, 1 entire nation off. The cartographer makes a small noise, folds his map, and excuses himself to have a professional crisis. You consider sending a message to retrieve them, something firm, official, with bold ink and unnecessarily long sentences. But before you can draft it, another note arrives. This one includes a drawing of local goats and a recipe for stew. The message inside reads, "There's talk of a parade. Very friendly people. Great weather. Please advise." You don't know how to advise. On one hand, they're technically in uniform, carrying imperial banners, and still salute passing mailmen. On the other hand, they are now referred to by the locals as the helpful tall ones, and have been given ceremonial sashes made from curtain fabric. It's unclear if this is occupation, adoption, or just particularly enthusiastic hospitality. You draft a report to the Ministry of Military Affairs titled Unintentional Expansion or Accidental Leave. You leave the conclusion section blank. It's safer that way. Later that day, another courier brings a package. Inside is a jar of pickled something, a silk scarf, and a postcard with the words, "Wish you were here." Scrawled in what you suspect is Commander Altich's cheerful ignorance, you sit back in your chair and try to calculate the political fallout of losing a province to pleasant conversation and fermented legumes. You fail. Then you wonder, very briefly, what it might be like to go there yourself, to step off the map, to be welcomed by strangers with lentils and flattery, and to disappear into the margins of your own empire. You fold the postcard. You label it pending. And you wonder how long it will take anyone to notice they're gone. The wedding is held in a courtyard that used to be a stable, which is fitting, because by the end of the evening, everyone agrees it smells about the same. Streamers hang from windows, borrowed from a celebration no one remembers, and someone has decorated the fountain with ribbons and exactly 1 duck. The duck wears a bow tie. His name, you're told, is Liberty. You don't remember approving this wedding, or the funding for it, or even who's getting married. But the word from above was clear. Morale needs lifting. Weddings lift morale, or at least distract from the inconvenient reality of geopolitical collapse. There's music, a suspiciously generous buffet, and a surprising number of people who claim to be cousins. The bride looks beautiful. The groom looks nervous. The officiant has lost the script and is improvising with theatrical flair. You hover near the punch bowl, drinking something red and alarming that might be fruit or betrayal. At some point, a brass band plays the national anthem backward, which may or may not be a mistake. No one corrects them. A man in a feathered hat gives a rousing speech about eternal unity, though his breath smells of fennel and something flammable. Then, during the toast, it happens. The bride's cousin, who has definitely had more of the punch than is safe, stands up with a glass of something amber and clears his throat like he's about to deliver a Shakespeare monologue. Instead, he unrolls a document and begins to read aloud Clause 14 of the treaty, word for word, out loud, to everyone. It takes a moment for the words to register, for the laughter to die, for the clinking of glasses to stop midair like startled birds. Then the shouting begins. It's not clear who throws the first kebab, but once the food starts flying, decorum dies a quick and greasy death. Someone knocks over the dessert table. Someone else stands on a chair and shouts, "Down with conditional sovereignty." A third person begins reciting poetry, loudly and out of sync with the chaos. The duck escapes during the confusion. One moment he's in the fountain, dignified and slightly wet. The next he's waddling through the crowd like he owns the cobblestones. No one stops him. In fact, someone salutes. You take cover behind a stack of chairs and try to find the bride. She's sword-fighting an elderly uncle using a baguette and a curtain rod. The groom has vanished entirely, possibly defected, possibly hiding. You make eye contact with the only other person not currently yelling, singing, or throwing hummus. It's the duck. He stares at you like he understands everything, like he saw this coming. Then he turns, hops a low wall, and disappears into the night, tail feathers glowing faintly in the moonlight. By morning, the riot is being called a spirited celebration of civic engagement. The duck is on pamphlets. Someone sketches a portrait of him mid-waddle, and it spreads faster than fire in a haystack. Children chant his name. Old men claim they knew him before he was a symbol. A woman tries to knit him a cape. You're summoned, of course. They hand you a paper and say you'll be drafting a speech for the duck. Not about the duck, for him. Apparently, he'll be leading a unity parade, which you're also organizing, and possibly marching in. You're not entirely sure anymore where your duties end and the absurdity begins. You ask what the speech should include. They say inspiration, hope, something about lentils, if possible. He's become quite popular with the vegetarians. You nod, slowly, thoughtfully, like someone who definitely isn't questioning every decision they've ever made. You look down at the blank page in front of you, the official seal already pressed in the corner. You write, "Citizens, I come to you not as a duck, but as a dream." And somehow, that feels true. It starts with the baker. It always does. He leans over his counter one morning, arms dusted with flour like he's been handling ghosts, and declares to anyone who'll listen that the fall of the empire was written in the stars. Mars was in retrograde, he says, stabbing a finger into the air like he's blaming it personally. You can't govern under that kind of energy. His customers nod, because disagreeing with the man who controls your bread supply is dangerous. Someone adds that the moon was also misaligned. Someone else says maybe it's because the tea's gotten weaker lately. By noon, the conversation has spread like jam, sticky, directionless, and impossible to clean up. Every shopfront, every cafe, every corner is suddenly an academy of historical revisionism. Men who yesterday couldn't locate the capital on a map now debate foreign treaties with the confidence of prophets. Women on balconies shout economic theories down to passing vendors. One man insists the real turning point was when the uniforms switched from robes to trousers. You lose the mystique, he says, snapping his suspenders for emphasis. No one respects an empire that creases. The barber, who has seen too much scalp and too little sense, blames it on hats. Ever since we started wearing those European monstrosities, he grumbles. The empire's been thinning faster than my clients. His customers laugh nervously while he wields his scissors a bit too close to their ears. You can't build dignity with a brim that small, he adds. At the cafe of no return, the same where you once heard a child predict the empire's collapse between spoonfuls of pudding, a debate rages loud enough to scare pigeons. The philosopher insists it was corruption. The shoemaker says it was modernization. The tailor thinks it was the lack of modernization. They all pause long enough to glare at each other, sip coffee, and continue proving why none of them have jobs in government. You sit in your usual corner, quietly eating olives from a chipped bowl. The conversation swirls around you, dense and fragrant, like overcooked stew. Someone slams a newspaper onto your table, the headline already smudged by 10 other hands. It says here, the man declares, that it wasn't the treaties at all, it was morale. He says morale like it's a contagious disease. You nod politely and reach for another olive. A musician joins in, claiming the empire's downfall was rhythm-related. We lost the beat, he says, tapping the table like a drum. You can't march into modernity off-tempo. Someone from across the room shouts, maybe we shouldn't have marched at all. Applause follows. Or maybe it's people slapping flies. It's hard to tell. Outside, a group of students holds a spontaneous lecture beneath a half-broken street lamp. They pass around a single book that no one actually reads but everyone quotes. It's all in here, one says, flipping through the pages like a magician revealing nothing. The empire fell because we stopped believing in it. The crowd murmurs as though this explains everything. You wonder, briefly, if anyone actually misses the empire, or if they just miss the feeling of having something big enough to blame. The baker's astrology theory has caught on. He's selling patriotic pastries, shaped like planets now. The barber renamed his shop The Fall of Man. Someone paints a mural of the Sultan staring wistfully at a crescent moon, which immediately becomes a popular photo backdrop for engagement portraits. As dusk drifts in, the air smells of sugar and speculation. Everyone is certain of something different. You finish your olives and leave a coin on the table, feeling oddly comforted by the chaos. At least no one's pretending things make sense anymore. Behind you, someone is already saying that the fall was inevitable, that it began the moment coffee replaced sherbet, or perhaps when ducks started giving speeches. You don't turn around. You've learned it's safer to let history rewrite itself while you walk home, quietly, under a sky that no one has yet blamed. It begins, as revolutions often do, with paperwork. You arrive at the post office to deliver a letter, only to find the door barricaded by mailbags and a suspiciously well-painted sign that reads, Provisional Republic of Postal Affairs entry by correspondence only. Through the glass, you can see a man wearing a hat made of envelopes. He waves at you with the confidence of someone who now believes himself head of state. You knock. A slot opens. A pair of eyes squints out. State your purpose, the voice demands, muffled by bureaucracy. You explain you're here on official business, to deliver a message. The eyes blink slowly. All communication must now pass through diplomatic channels, the voice says, and slides you a form labeled Application for Recognition of Sovereignty. Short version. It's 8 pages long. Inside, the post office hums with purpose. The clerks have become ministers. The chief sorter now calls himself Chancellor of Logistics. Someone's draped a curtain over the sorting table to serve as a national banner. Upon closer inspection, you realize it's composed entirely of stamps, thousands of them, overlapping in chaotic pride. It smells, faintly, of glue and rebellion. You are escorted to the negotiation chamber, which used to be the lost and found bin. The air is thick with ink and ambition. The chancellor sits behind a desk made of parcels. His spectacles gleam with revolutionary fervor. We have declared independence, he announces, as though you couldn't tell. Effective immediately. You ask why. He leans forward, eyes shining. Philosophical reasons, he says. We deliver everyone's news, yet no one delivers ours. We are invisible hands moving visible letters. This injustice can no longer stand. He pauses dramatically. Also, management refused our request for a second tea break. You try diplomacy. You offer them more envelopes, higher grade parchment, even complimentary sealing wax. The chancellor shakes his head. We are a sovereign people now. We print our own. He holds up a small piece of paper. It's a coupon. It reads, "One free letter, redeemable upon recognition of the Republic." He explains that it's their new currency. It's backed, apparently, by the trust of the people and a very reliable pigeon. You mention, gently, that pigeons are not legally recognized as financial guarantors. He stares at you with pity. That's exactly what the Ministry of Finance said before they stopped existing. Outside, a crowd has gathered. Some cheer, some deliver petitions. A few are just there to mail things and look deeply confused. A woman waves a postcard and shouts, "Long live the courier class." Someone else begins handing out pamphlets titled, "The Manifesto of Modern Mail." Back inside, the newly self-appointed Minister of Stamps unveils their anthem. It's mostly whistling and the sound of envelopes being sealed in rhythm. You clap politely. The Chancellor beams. "Unity through postage," he declares. A small child, perhaps inspired or simply mischievous, salutes and asks if they can start their own republic too. "Only if you have infrastructure," the Chancellor replies. The child nods seriously and runs off toward the bakery. You realize this could spread. Revolutions, like rumors, love momentum. You try one final appeal. "Surely," you say, "we're all still part of the same nation. We share language, history, stationery." The Chancellor considers this, then solemnly stamps your sleeve with the official seal of the Postal Republic. "Now you are one of us," he says. "Temporary visa." When you return to your office, there are already rumors of a splinter movement forming in the Telegraph Bureau. You sit at your desk, stare at the coupon in your hand, and wonder how long it will be before someone tries to mail you their Declaration of Independence. Outside, the flag of stamps flutters in the wind, half sticking to the window, half believing it's free. The meeting begins with the usual ceremony of sighs. Everyone arrives late, but pretends they've been waiting for each other. The curtains are drawn, the coffee is cold, and the mood feels like it's been sitting in a drawer since last spring. A map hangs on the wall, held up by pins in sheer denial. You take your seat among men who smell faintly of ink, sweat, and the faint perfume of political survival. Someone clears his throat. It's the minister of something important, though you can't remember what exactly. Possibly trade, possibly regret. He adjusts his cuffs and says, "Gentlemen, we must face facts." This is clearly the work of the Austrians. A pause follows. Not because anyone disagrees, but because it's such an obvious relief. Blaming Austria is an old habit, like whistling or oversalting soup, a comforting ritual. The perfect scapegoat, close enough to be plausible, polite enough not to retaliate immediately. Heads nod around the table like pigeons agreeing with destiny. "Yes," says the general, whose medals outnumber his victories. "It explains everything. Subversion, sabotage, the missing, shipments of gunpowder, even the weather." He leans back in satisfaction, as if order has finally returned to the universe. Someone scribbles, "Austria," on a notepad and circles it twice. Another man adds an exclamation mark for good measure. The consensus builds quickly. The empire's problems, diplomatic confusion, missing maps, philosophical janitors, all neatly wrapped in the golden ribbon of Austrian interference. You sip your tea, which tastes like surrender, and quietly wonder what Austria has actually done lately. You can't recall a single incident. In fact, the last correspondence from Vienna was a polite note about missing tableware from the last summit. But you don't say this. It's dangerous to be accurate in a room that's finally found a convenient story. The Sultan isn't present, but his chair looms large, draped in red cloth like a silent judge. The advisors keep glancing at it, as if waiting for divine confirmation to descend upon the upholstery. When none arrives, the Minister of War leans forward and mutters, "They've been too quiet." That's how you know. Everyone murmurs agreement. Someone suggests immediate sanctions. Someone else proposes a very firm letter. The general offers to prepare troops purely for show, of course. The treasurer objects, gently pointing out that there is no money for shows or troops. The general suggests creative accounting. The treasurer pretends not to hear him. Then a clerk enters the room, carrying a stack of papers so high it leans like a tower considering collapse. He bows awkwardly and places a report in front of you. The seal is still warm from the wax. You break it open and read the first few lines aloud. According to reliable intelligence, you begin, Austria has done nothing. The silence is immediate and total. Someone coughs. The general's mustache twitches, which is the closest he ever comes to emotion. Nothing, repeats the Minister of Dud. Trade or regret. What do you mean? Nothing. You shrug. Precisely nothing. No troop movements, no letters, no intrigue, no enthusiasm of any kind. The general frowns deeply. That's even worse, he says. They're hiding something. A few heads nod again. The rhythm of agreement resumes, slightly slower but no less certain. You consider arguing. You even open your mouth. But at that exact moment, a servant enters with a plate of figs, glistening and perfectly distracting. The report is gently moved aside to make room. By the time dessert ends, no one remembers it existed. The discussion turns to flags, slogans, and whether the national anthem could use a new verse about vigilance. Someone suggests scheduling a press release. Someone else insists on a parade. The general begins humming something martial through his mustache. You glance at the untouched report beneath the plate of figs, its corners curling like a secret trying not to be noticed. It feels like the empire in miniature, something factual, buried under something sweet. Outside, thunder grumbles faintly, but no one looks up. The meeting adjourns with a sense of accomplishment so hollow it almost echoes. Everyone leaves believing progress has been made, and somewhere in Vienna, a perfectly innocent Austrian sneezes and unknowingly takes the blame. The flag committee meets in a borrowed room that smells faintly of onions, ink, and destiny. The table is covered in scraps of cloth, sketches, and one very smug pigeon perched on the windowsill. It's supposed to be a straightforward task design, a new flag for a new era, but nothing in the empire is ever straightforward, especially when symbolism is involved. You take your seat between the Minister of Culture, who already looks exhausted, and a man who introduces himself as an expert in triangles. He says this like it's a noble title. Across from you, the chairman clears his throat and declares, "Gentlemen, we are here to design the image that will unite the people." He pauses dramatically. A flag that says, "We may be falling apart, but we look good doing it." The first proposal features a large crescent moon, elegant and serene. Immediately, the man with the triangles objects. Too passive, he says. It suggests we're waiting for something to happen. We need angles, boldness, action. He slaps down a sketch consisting entirely of intersecting shapes. It looks like geometry had a nervous breakdown. Someone else suggests adding a star. Someone else insists stars are too celestial for these times. The Minister of Culture proposes a single olive branch for peace, which earns a groan from the military representative, who mutters, "We've tried peace. It didn't stick." By the second hour, the table looks like a battlefield of fabric. Red strips tangle with blue triangles. Gold thread unravels like the empire's sense of proportion. Someone introduces the color green, claiming it represents renewal, while someone else argues it represents envy, to which a third person says envy is renewal, in a way. You stare at your teacup and wonder if anyone here knows what a flag is supposed to do. The pigeon on the windowsill coos loudly, as if offering input. The chairman takes it as a sign and insists that birds symbolize unity. Birds migrate. Someone counters. They leave when things get bad. Tension builds. A man in a fez raises his hand and suggests an entirely blank flag, a statement on the futility of identity. He's met with gasps, then applause, then an accusation of treason. You lean slightly toward the Minister of Culture and whisper, "Do we have an anthem for chaos yet?" By midday, alliances form. The triangular faction sits on one side, scribbling aggressively. The Crescent loyalists sit opposite, clutching their curves with religious fervor. The Olive Branch coalition hovers in the middle, pleading for harmony and snacks. You abstain from voting. It feels safer that way. The argument about the crescent moon begins quietly enough. Someone calls it gentle. Someone else calls it passive-aggressive. The word hangs in the air like smoke. You see it happen, the shift, the snap, the spark. Voices rise. A quill is thrown. The man with the triangles slams his fist on the table and shouts, "Geometry will not be silenced." The pigeon flees. So does reason. Within minutes, the room descends into chaos. Paper flies. A flagpole topples. Someone throws a kebab that had been meant for lunch. You duck, but not fast enough. It hits you squarely, leaving a trail of sauce and diplomacy down your collar. When the first punch lands, no one remembers who threw it. It's followed by two more, and suddenly half the committee is under the table, declaring independence from the other half. The fight ends only when the tea tray overturns, flooding the floor and extinguishing everyone's enthusiasm. The flags are soaked. The ink runs. The Empire's new emblem, it seems, is a muddy blur of colors and compromise. You leave the room with a black eye and half a kebab, which feels like fair compensation. As you walk down the corridor, you pass the janitor, who glances at the mess behind you and sighs. "So what did they decide?" he asks. You pause. "That we're not ready for unity," you say. But triangles are winning on points. You wait until midnight, because all bad ideas feel more manageable after dark. The archives are quiet, almost reverent, as though the Empire's entire history is sleeping and you are the one fool tiptoeing through its dreams. The lamps burn low. The air smells like old parchment and the ghosts of better handwriting. You carry a small satchel with ink, paper, and what you optimistically call a plan. The treaty sits on the desk like it knows you're coming. Its pages are pressed flat under glass, dignified, untouchable. The script shimmers faintly in the lamplight, every word still managing to sound both official and deeply unfortunate. You take a deep breath. Tell yourself this is just administrative maintenance, and unlatch the case. Your quill trembles slightly as you lift it. The ink looks thicker than you remember, darker too. You whisper, "Just a few adjustments." It feels important to say it out loud, to make it sound harmless. You cross out one line about territorial concessions, replace it with mutual understanding. You change surrender to strategic flexibility. You almost feel proud. Then you bump the teacup. It happens in slow motion. The cup wobbles once, twice, and then tips completely, sending a dark tide of sweetened chaos across the treaty. The ink bleeds instantly, turning diplomacy into an abstract painting. You swear softly in 3 languages and lunge for a cloth that doesn't exist. The pages stick to your fingers like guilt. In your frantic rescue efforts, you hit the candle. The flame flares, sputters, and drops a burning fleck onto the corner of the parchment. You slap at it, creating a scorch mark shaped like an accusing eyebrow. The room smells faintly of caramelized failure. You stand there, motionless, as your brain scrambles for solutions. Rewriting the Empire's legal foundation was one thing. Explaining scorch marks and tea stains on an international document is another. You look around for something, anything, to disguise the damage. The only other papers nearby are fragments of old correspondence and an unfinished poem written by a former archivist who apparently had feelings about lentils. You hesitate. Then you write. Not much, just a few lines, to fill the blank where ink once existed. Something about renewal through sustenance and the binding warmth of shared broth. It sounds vaguely symbolic. You even add the recipe that inspired it, adjusting the quantities for poetic rhythm. By the time you're done, the treaty reads like it was co-authored by a diplomat and a chef who believed in emotional cooking. You seal it back up, carefully aligning the scorch mark under the wax so it looks deliberate. You tell yourself no one will notice. They never notice anything until it's too late. The next morning, you arrive early, trying to look as innocent as someone with ink on their sleeve and tea in their soul can manage. The archivists are already buzzing. Apparently, the newly annotated version of the treaty is circulating. Someone from the Foreign Office calls it a moving reinterpretation of national unity. Someone else is crying in the corridor, claiming the soup recipe speaks to the spirit of the people. You listen in stunned silence as the clerk reads aloud the revised passage, his voice trembling with patriotic emotion. Let there be lentils, for they are humble yet enduring. Let there be salt, for it binds as treaties should. And may the empire, like a simmering pot, find harmony in its ingredients. Applause follows. Applause. You nod along like everyone else, mouth dry, eyes fixed on the floor. You try to process how you've just turned an act of forgery into state poetry. Someone suggests printing the recipe on coins. Another proposes naming it the national soup. The Sultan reportedly approves the sentiment and the seasoning. By afternoon, there's already a parade planned in honor of culinary diplomacy. You attend, dazed, holding a bowl you didn't ask for. The soup is excellent, balanced, warm, oddly comforting. You take a sip and think, maybe this is how empires survive, not through war or treaties, but through accidents dressed as purpose. The taste lingers. So does the silence of the archives, somewhere behind you, waiting for the next fool with a quill and an idea. You wake to the sound of panic disguised as procedure. The corridors hum with urgency, the kind that smells faintly of ink and bad decisions. You follow the noise to the war room, where a cluster of uniforms hovers over a table scattered with maps, pastries, and what appears to be a very angry pigeon. At the center stands General Arslan, mustache at full alert, posture sharp enough to wound. He slaps a memo onto the table and declares, "We are at war with Sweden." The words hang in the air like smoke no one wants to inhale. You blink. Sweden? Someone coughs. Someone else looks at the map, which, notably, does not feature Sweden. The general folds his arms and repeats, louder this time, "Sweden." You approach carefully, as one does with large animals and men certain of their own clarity. "May I ask," you say, "how this was determined?" He hands you the memo. It's short, smudged, and smells faintly of pigeon. The sentence at the heart of the confusion reads, "Trade concerns with Sweden escalating, urgent action needed." The trade has been misread as raid. You look up, it says trade. The general narrows his eyes. That's what they want you to think. You inhale through your teeth, the sound of a soul giving up slowly. And what action have we taken? He gestures proudly toward the pigeon, now preening on a stack of documents. "We sent the message at dawn." You stare at the bird. It stares back. Its beak is slightly bent, its feathers bristled with purpose. "What message?" The general straightens. An official declaration of hostility. Firm but professional. There's a silence that could power a small village. You press your fingers to your temple and say, very slowly, "You sent a war declaration via pigeon." He nods, satisfied. "Our fastest courier." You try to imagine the pigeon's flight north across mountains, rivers, and lands that have never heard of you, carrying the words "formal hostilities" in tiny, furious handwriting. You picture the Swedish officials receiving it with the same expression you're wearing now. A mixture of disbelief and second-hand embarrassment. By afternoon, a reply arrives. The pigeon, heroic, smug, returns with a small wicker basket tied to its leg. Inside are biscuits, a note, and what appears to be a single knitted mitten. The note, written in immaculate penmanship, reads, "We believe there has been some misunderstanding. We have no quarrel. Please enjoy these pastries. Warm regards, Stockholm. The general reads it twice, jaw tightening. A cunning move, he says. Psychological warfare. So polite it's insulting. You pour yourself a cup of tea, mostly to stop your hands from shaking. It's not war, General. It's hospitality. He frowns at the pigeon, who has now taken to strutting across the table like a diplomat who's read too much of his own press. Still, the general says, initiative should be rewarded. By evening, an official document is drafted. It promotes the pigeon by name, which is apparently Rustam, to the rank of lieutenant messenger, complete with a tiny medal fashioned from a button and an unreasonable amount of ceremony. The bird accepts this honor by defecating on the Treaty of Mali, which everyone agrees is symbolically appropriate. News of the Swedish conflict spreads faster than you can deny it. The newspapers run headlines like, Empire demonstrates firm foreign policy in northern affairs. A rumor claims Sweden has surrendered already, though to what, no one specifies. The baker down the street renames his cinnamon rolls Victory Twists. You spend the rest of the night writing an apology to the Swedish ambassador. You choose your words carefully, tucking them between layers of diplomacy and shame. You attach the note to Rustam's leg yourself. He coos approvingly, as if acknowledging that peace is fine too, as long as it comes with snacks. When he takes off, wings slicing through the pale morning light, you find yourself whispering, fly straight this time, because deep down, you're not entirely sure he will. The announcement comes quietly, as most endings do. No fanfare, no proclamation, just a palace servant standing in the doorway at dawn saying, the Sultan is not here. The words fall flat in the marble hallway, polite but impossible. You blink at him, expecting the rest of the sentence, not here yet, or not here in spirit. But there's nothing, just the hollow shuffle of sandals on tile and the faint smell of rosewater fading down the corridor. The Sultan's chambers are immaculate, as if he simply stepped out for air and forgot to come back. The robe still draped over the chair, the teacup half full, the ink on his desk not yet dry. A half-written letter rests beneath his seal, which for once is exactly where it should be. You pick it up. It begins, I am tired of talking about endings, and ends mid-sentence, with a dot of ink that looks suspiciously like finality. Outside, the palace stirs into confusion disguised as efficiency. Guards form search parties, ministers call emergency meetings, clerks take attendance, as if the Sultan might appear by answering present. Someone checks the gardens, someone else the stables, and someone clearly new checks under the table in the council chamber. No one finds anything but dust and theories. By noon, the city has heard. By evening, it's telling its own stories. Some say he's on a secret pilgrimage, others that he's gone to negotiate peace himself. The barber claims he saw him boarding a boat in disguise, carrying only a walking stick and a bag of almonds. A woman swears she glimpsed him in the marketplace, haggling over dates with suspiciously regal posture. Then, 3 days later, a fisherman finds a pair of slippers by the sea, silk, embroidered, soaked with salt. He brings them to the palace, wrapped in his net, eyes wide with superstition. The vizier inspects them solemnly and announces, these are definitely his. A pause follows, filled with the collective discomfort of people realizing they're now, possibly, without a ruler. Someone asks if this counts as abdication. Someone else says it depends on whether he took his slippers off voluntarily. The debate lasts 6 hours. The army waits for orders that never come. The treasury waits for signatures that won't. You sit at your desk, drafting a memorandum titled Temporary Measures Pending Clarification of Supreme Absence. It's the kind of phrase that sounds responsible until you realize it means nothing. Days turn to weeks. The empire does not collapse. Exactly, it just sighs and keeps going. Decisions are made by committees that meet too often and decide too little. The official portraits stay up, but people stop bowing to them. The janitor's son, who once led a protest for shoelaces, now delivers speeches in the courtyard about adaptive governance. They draw small crowds. Someone always brings tea. Then a letter arrives. No seal, no address, just folded parchment that smells faintly of the sea. It's signed only with an initial, but the handwriting is unmistakable, slanted, steady, patient. It says, "I have found a quieter empire. The cats here are numerous and reasonable. The sea makes no demands. Tell them I wish them well. Tell them to try lentils instead of gold. They last longer." The fisherman who delivered it swears he saw him in Greece, sitting on a stone wall, tossing fish to stray cats, and smiling like a man who has finally found a simpler problem to solve. No crown, no entourage, just sunlight and the rhythm of waves that don't care about treaties. You read the letter twice before placing it in the archives, between decrees on foreign policy and lost property reports. Then you close the cabinet gently, as though not to wake something sleeping. Outside, the call to prayer drifts over the rooftops, unhurried, unbothered. The empire continues, smaller now, maybe lighter, and somewhere across the sea, a man who used to be sultan feeds another cat, watching the horizon like someone who's finally off duty. The journalist's daughter is 8 years old and takes notes like she's already planning your obituary. She sits across from you at a desk too big for her, legs swinging, a pencil the size of a spear in her small hand. Her notebook is pink, decorated with stickers of planets and one slightly crooked cat. She introduces herself formally, says this interview is for her school project, and asks if she can record you. You nod. She presses a button on a toy shaped like a snail. It begins blinking red. Her first question: why did the empire fall? You open your mouth, then close it again. There's no version of that answer that fits into crayons and snack time. You think of starting with politics, treaties, wars, the usual adult excuses, but she's looking at you with the kind of pure, unblinking curiosity that strips away all the jargon. You reach for something simpler. Have you ever made pickles? You ask. She frowns. Like cucumbers? Yes, the cucumbers. You lean forward conspiratorially. You take something fresh and green, and you seal it in a jar. Add salt, vinegar, a few nice ideas. It keeps well for a while. People like it. It lasts through winter. But then, one day, someone forgets to change the brine, or adds sugar instead of salt, or drops the jar. And suddenly, it smells strange. That's what happened. We forgot to change the brine. She writes this down with great seriousness, tongue sticking out as she concentrates. So the empire, spoiled? In a sense, you say. It got a little cloudy. Her next question comes immediately. Who dropped the jar? You hesitate. Names float up in your mind, some powerful, some pitiful, some just unlucky enough to have been standing nearby when things went sideways. Everyone, you finally say. We all had slippery hands. She nods like that makes perfect sense. Then she asks if anyone tried to clean it up. Oh, yes, you say. We had meetings, committees, speeches. A parade once. We used many napkins, but they kept falling apart. She pauses her writing to study you, squinting a little, as if she's trying to decide whether you're very wise or very tired. My dad says you were important. That's debatable, you say. She giggles. He also said you were there when everything ended. Technically, yes, you say, folding your hands. But endings are slow things. They sneak up like old age or bad weather. One day, the walls start leaking. One day, the stamps stop sticking. One day, the Sultan goes for a walk and doesn't come back. You don't realize you're at the end until someone asks you to explain it to a child. She's silent for a moment, then asks, "Were you scared?" You want to tell her yes, that the nights were heavy with the sound of decisions collapsing, that the air itself seemed to hold its breath. But she's 8. You don't want to hand her fear disguised as history. So instead, you say, "Sometimes, but mostly, I was just busy pretending to be brave." She writes that down too. Then she flips to a new page and begins to draw. Her pencil scratches the paper furiously, a small storm of graphite. When she finishes, she holds it up for you to see. It's a picture of you, standing at the edge of a well, arms flailing, one foot already gone. Around the rim, small stick figures wave politely as you fall. At the bottom, there's a puddle labeled History. You study it. It's surprisingly accurate, she beams. Do you like it? I love it, you say. You've captured the mood perfectly. She tears the page out, folds it carefully, and hands it to you like a certificate. For your office, she says. You take it, unsure whether to laugh or salute. The recorder snail stops blinking. The interview is over. She thanks you, gathers her notes, and skips away, humming something tuneless and happy. You sit there a while longer, the paper still warm in your hands. The drawing looks less like a fall the longer you stare at it, and more like a kind of flight, clumsy, unplanned, but free all the same. It ends on a Tuesday, which feels both too ordinary and exactly right. No fanfare, no final decree stamped in wax, just a subtle thinning of the noise that held everything together. The palace gates stay closed, but not locked. The guards, who once stood like statues, are gone, some home to families, some to fishing, one to open a bakery that sells loaves shaped like provinces. The city wakes slower than usual, uncertain whether to keep pretending or finally exhale. You notice it first by the silence of routine. No trumpets at dawn, no echo of boots in the courtyard. The flagpole stands bare, a thin line against the sky. The rope sways in the breeze, tapping a rhythm against the metal, as if waiting for someone to remember what it was for. No one does. Down the hill, the marketplace opens late. The tax collector's desk sits abandoned, covered in dust and daring hope. A baker gives away his first loaf of bread just because there's no one left to charge him for it. Two men argue over whether the empire still exists if no one's paying taxes. They settle it by agreeing to split a melon and not think about it again. At the harbor, a dog sleeps on the palace steps. Someone tries to shoo it away out of habit, but the dog doesn't move, and no one insists. It has the calm, confident look of a creature that has outlasted institutions. You envy it a little. A man appears near the square selling postcards. The fronts show fading illustrations of sultans and domes and borders that no longer apply. The back reads, in careful handwriting, "We almost made it." You buy one, though you're not sure why. Maybe to prove it happened, or maybe because no one else is documenting it. He thanks you and folds your coin into his pocket with the solemnity of a priest taking confession. The cafe where bureaucrats once argued now serves only tea and long silences. You sit by the window, watching the light change, noticing how peaceful collapse can look when no one is fighting it anymore. A few old men discuss the weather with the same urgency they once reserved for treaties. One of them raises his cup and says, "To survival," and no one laughs. You walk through the streets that used to buzz with orders and errands and official errands about orders. The air feels strangely wide, like the city has shed something heavy. Children chase each other through the alleys, their laughter echoing where decrees once did. A shopkeeper hums as he paints over the imperial crest on his sign, turning it into a sunburst. It looks better that way. By afternoon, the realization has spread, not through panic, but through small, wordless gestures. A soldier hangs up his uniform to dry and doesn't put it back on. A clerk tears a blank sheet of parchment into tiny squares and lets the wind take them. A mother tells her son to study medicine instead of politics. The empire isn't gone in a blaze, it's evaporating gently, like tea cooling in an untouched cup. You find yourself walking toward the old administrative building one last time, though you're not sure what you're expecting to find. The doors are open. Papers scattered across the floor like leaves. You step inside, pick one up. It's blank except for a single ink smudge, a small fingerprint left by someone who once believed the work mattered. You fold it carefully and slip it into your coat pocket. Outside, the sun lowers itself over the city, painting the rooftops in tired gold. The horizon looks softer than you remember. You stand there, watching the sky change color, feeling both empty and full at once. The air carries no anthem, no decree, no command, just the faint scent of sea salt and possibility. You think of sending the postcard, but there's no one left to address it to. So you keep it instead, a small relic of an empire that ended politely, without an argument, on a Tuesday. And as the last light spills over the palace stones, you wonder not for the first time if maybe this is how most great things end. Not with thunder, just with quiet permission to begin again. No one tells you to stop showing up, you just notice, one morning, that no one's waiting for you. The palace gates stay open, but the guards have found other things to guard, like their own lives. The corridors are emptier than silence itself. You take one last walk through them anyway, shoes clicking against marble that no longer echoes back. The desks are dusty, the chairs uneven. The empire's paperwork has begun to curl at the edges, letters fading into polite amnesia. You stand in your old office doorway for a long while, looking at the spot where your hat used to hang. Then you take it down and leave. Retirement is not so much a choice as a gentle forgetting. You move into a small house outside the city, one with a garden that's too ambitious for your back and a fence that's too short for your tomatoes. The air smells of earth instead of ink, and that feels like progress. You plant things that have no deadlines: basil, mint, quiet. The tomatoes thrive, as if unaware they are being grown by a man who once drafted imperial decrees. Every morning, you talk to them as if they're diplomats, slowly, persuasively, trying to negotiate ripeness. Your neighbors think you're a scholar. You let them. You wear your old hat when you garden, and once, a child passing by calls it a funny little crown. You smile but don't correct him. The idea amuses you: a kingdom of soil, a parliament of bees. You rule over the cucumbers with mild benevolence. Sometimes letters arrive. Former colleagues write to update you on nothing at all. The treasury clerk says he's taken up painting. The librarian has married the protester who once demanded shoelace reform. Even the general writes once, sending a single sentence: "Sweden sends their regards." You laugh, fold the note, and use it to mark your place in a cookbook. You begin writing letters too, not to anyone specific, just to the air, to memory, to the parts of the world that used to listen. You write about the sultan who vanished into sunlight, about the duck that became a symbol, about the treaty that smelled faintly of vanilla and chaos. You write about how endings always come disguised as afternoons. You never mail them. You keep them in a box under your bed, next to the last official seal of the empire. It still smells faintly of candle wax and denial. The city changes. Maps are redrawn by people who have never seen the places they're naming. The flags are new, the anthems borrowed. The baker down the road sells bread in the shape of a star now, not a crescent. It doesn't taste different. Life never does, not really. Once, a traveler stops by your garden to ask for directions. He's young, eager, smelling of road dust and optimism. He asks where you're from. The question hangs there like a breeze that doesn't know where to settle. You think of maps that no longer exist, borders that bled into one another, languages that folded quietly into the next. You think of flags that rose and fell, of signatures that undid centuries, of laughter echoing down marble halls that have since become someone's storage room. You pause too long, and the traveler looks at you curiously. So you smile, tip your hat the crown, and say, "It used to be somewhere, very important." He nods, polite but puzzled, and thanks you before continuing down the road. You watch him go until he disappears into the dust, certain that one day he'll walk over the ruins of what you built and never even know it. As the evening settles, you sit on the porch with a bowl of your tomatoes. They're uneven, imperfect, but red as memory. You eat one whole, juice running down your hand, and think that maybe this is what peace tastes like. Not victory, not loss, just the quiet persistence of something still growing. You hang your hat on the wall before bed, the same hook you used in your office. And for a moment, just a flicker, it feels like ceremony. Like maybe you're still part of something grand. The night hums outside, the crickets performing a softer anthem. You close your eyes, and the garden sways gently in the dark. Loyal, patient, eternal, in the only way things ever can be.